So I just finished setting up a violin for one of my middle school students. She brought it to me in class today and said, "Oh, I have this violin at home. I was wondering if you could take a look at it and help me set it up, put finger tapes and stuff on it." So I was like, "Okay, sure." So I brought it home with me today, and here's the instrument. It looks decent enough, right? One of those cheap, mass-produced, probably $100 violins that you can buy on the internet. The bow is really heavy and a little bit crooked when you look at it the from the screw. I don't know if you can see it on camera there, but it's a little bit crooked. You can see it has a little bit of a curve to it. The instrument itself, I don't know if you can tell, but like the strings are not completely straight and they're not an equal distance apart. I had a really hard time putting strings on it because they didn't fit through the holes in the tailpiece. I was finally able to get it to work, but then the fine tuners didn't really align with the strings and weren't catching, and I had to go through some special hoops to get it to work. And yeah, it was kind of a struggle to set this thing up, but here it is. And this is kind of like a showcase so you can see what these cheap, like factory produced instruments sound like versus my violin, which I have over here on the side. I'm gonna play the same thing with this instrument, with this violin, the cheap one, and the bow. And then I'll play the same thing with my violin and my bow, and you can see the difference in sound quality and just the difference in how they play. I can tell you that from playing on this one, that this one is really difficult to get a good sound out of. So here we go. I'm just going to play a quick little scale so you get a feel for how this sounds. Okay, I'm not sure how much of that is going to come through on my iPhone speakers or my iPhone microphone, but it was really hard to get a good sound out of this, and the intonation is kind of funky, and this bow is really hard to control. So let's compare that to my violin, which I have right here, and my bow. And I'll play the same thing, okay? So again, I don't know how much of that is going to come through on my iPhone microphone, but this is so much easier to play. It's so much easier to control. It's so much easier to get a good sound out of it. Granted, this is a very expensive instrument and a very expensive bow, but that other one is just very difficult to get a good sound out of. It's hard to play. It's hard to even get it in tune. I had a really hard time getting it in tune, and I tune a million of these school instruments a day, and this one was like a struggle. So let that just be maybe, I don't know, eye-opening, I suppose, if you take a look at this and see the difference in quality of like some of these really cheap mass-produced instruments. Sure, you can buy a violin on Amazon for $100, but I really highly wouldn't recommend it They don't sound good, they don't last long, they're very cheaply built, and they're hard to play on. They're going to discourage young students from wanting to play the instrument because they're just difficult. You're not going to sound good, you're going to have a bad time playing it. And they're kind of marketed towards kids because they do these fancy paint colors. I don't know if you can tell, it has a little bit of like a sparkle finish to it. So like it's pretty, it's nice to look at, and they usually come in fun colors, but I really highly recommend not to ever purchase one of these really cheap violins. They're just not going to be a good experience, especially for a kid who's just learning an instrument. In this case, my student is a really good student, and I did my best to set this up for her, so hopefully it works out. But I highly encourage my students, and I highly encourage anybody to not purchase these really cheap mass-produced instruments because they just don't sound good, and you're just not going to have a good experience with them. Again, I don't know how much of this was going to pick up on my iPhone microphone, but hopefully this was interesting.